The Evergreen Show, taking your business from seed to sapling to towering giant. With your hosts, best-selling author and business growth experts Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. This is the only show that gives you proven, pragmatic, and immediately applicable business growth strategies every week in 15 minutes or less. Here's Noah and Shawn.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Evergreen Show. This is your host, Noah Fleming, with my co-host, Mr. Shawn Veltman. Shawn, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic. It is gorgeous and sunny out, though you got more of that than I when you were in California recently.
I sure did. I had a fantastic trip. And hey, Shawn, listen to this. This today is episode 41 of the Evergreen Show. I'm looking back at my files here. We've got 40 shows behind us, all packed with goodness. And you know, one of the things that I keep hearing from people is they love the time that we put into this podcast, meaning they love the 15-minute short episodes. It allows them to digest something on their way to work or during a lunch break. It allows them to get through it. You know, one of the things I find with podcasts is there's so many and there's so many good ones, but some of them are going 2, 3, 4 hours long. I don't get it. I mean, first of all, the best one is our buddy Tim Ferriss, who's got a huge podcast, author of the 4-Hour Work Week, but yet he's putting out podcasts that are 4 or 5 hours long each week. So it's all packed with good stuff. But you know, one of the things that I think we're moving towards in our world is far more digestible content for everybody's busy lives. So I'm enjoying the 15-minute time spread. I've just spent a minute and a half of it. That means, Shawn, we got to get down to biz here.
That sounds good. So tell me, Noah, what are we talking about today?
Well, you might not even know this, but you said something interesting on a call that we were doing with a client recently. And we were talking about their sales meetings. We were talking about, we were talking about their management meetings because we were advising them. We were having some discussions about some of the meetings going on behind the scenes. And you said something that I thought was really interesting. And you said, you know, one of the things that I've seen done with some other clients of mine, and that I think is a great way for executives and management to end the meeting with, is to ask the question around the table, all right, what's the one thing that you haven't told me today that you don't want to tell me? And to me, that's a really interesting question, especially to ask in a business where, you know, management's coming together regularly. They're talking about sometimes touchy subjects. They're talking about strategic initiatives. And to ask that question, what's the one thing you haven't told me or that you don't want to tell me today? And so really pushing for that openness, that honesty, to me, I thought that was fascinating. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that and then give our listeners some tactical takeaways about how they can use that in their efforts, regardless of company size or industry.
Absolutely. And, you know, I first heard it about a year and a half ago with a client I was working with, and I immediately stole it, wrote it down, put it into my replicate and reuse bucket because it's such a good question, you know, for all the reasons that you pointed out. But specifically for me and in that company, it was that people were hoping that something would go away. You know, they were hoping that they'd be able to solve the problem. And what we know is that, you know, we see this at every level of management. We see people saying, oh, you know, this has gone bad. I'll work extra hard over the next 2 weeks and fix it. Or, you know, this is not going my way, but I think the market's going to correct and it'll fix it. When it happens for too long in the stock market, we get, you know, Ponzi schemes and things like Madoff and all the rest of it. When it happens in companies, we end up seeing divisions close. We end up seeing departments fail. And so much of it could be fixed if people were willing to take that, you know, that minute of embarrassment or hurt or owning up to what's going on or what they're not proud of and getting the support of the rest of the team.
So I get the question. I get the idea to push for it. I think, you know, one of the things that comes to mind is you talked about it. Do we still, though, I mean, what's the difference between asking that question at the end versus having a setting where, you know, you should be able to be open and honest and you should be able to share? What's the difference of asking that question at that point or posing it in that way versus just having a culture that's based on that type of openness and honesty? You know what I'm asking?
Of course I know what you're asking. Yeah, and it's a great question. I think the ultimate where you want to be is, of course, to have a culture where nobody feels like they have to hide anything. right? And if you have that kind of culture, great. You don't need to ask this question at the end of meetings because people are already telling you everything. But as a starter step, and when companies are starting to embrace radical candor, which is a term that I know has been around for a while, but I started hearing it and seeing it and using it a lot more after reading Ray Dalio's fabulous new book, Principles. When you're starting to bring radical candor into place, it can be hard. And it can be hard for a couple of reasons. One is it's hard for people to believe that their bosses actually want to hear the truth. They actually want to hear about what's going wrong, that they're not going to get fired immediately because something went wrong. And a lot of times this just comes around showing everybody in your organization that you are developing in a way that you'll handle problems, you'll take care of the problem without having too much recriminations on the person. I mean, obviously, if we get to a point where it's the person's fault over and over again, something's going to have to happen. But there's a big difference between that and the fear that most people have, and sometimes rightly have in companies, that if I let them know everything that was going wrong, I wouldn't be coming in on Monday.
Right. Yeah, I think there certainly is a fear, especially with executives or people that are running certain divisions of the company, to share those things, which the president or the CEO might have, assume that, well, you should have that under control. But I think this idea of radical candor, by the way, I've read Ray Dalio's book as well. It's fantastic. And I'm sure we'll talk about another concepts out of that book. But it's so important. I mean, in so many areas, I think to clients that either you and I have worked with together, or clients that I've advised on a coaching relationship, or clients that I've just acted as a trusted advisor, where the idea of radical candor and telling them the things that I might not want to tell them is so important. I mean, that's partially why you're being paid as an expert, is to say the things that, they might not want to hear. And so as an executive in an organization or whatever, sometimes we do need to bring those things to the table that they may not want to hear this. I might not want to tell them, but I need to tell them, whether it's because I need some additional support, whether it's I need some additional brains at the table, or whether I need to let them know that something's going on. And, so people aren't blindsided by this. I think there's so many valuable components of this. One thing you mentioned there, which I wanted to go back to, you said, when companies are starting with this sort of radical candor, this open honesty, or building this type of culture, do you have any more suggestions on, I guess there's two things I'm thinking of. One, how do companies know if they've already got this type of, candor from their people? And two, if they don't, what can they start doing immediately to start to build this?
Sure. And I think both of those tie together really nicely with something that I was hoping to get into the conversation as well, which is ensure that when you're doing this, you have a way to be finding this stuff out independently, so that when somebody hasn't told you something, even after you've asked for it. Right. So we do a lot of work in organizations where we're putting in measurement devices, whether it's note-taking, whether it's CRM, whether it's exception reporting, whether it's analytics. But these all create more visibility into the company so that management can look more deeply, and find problems that wouldn't have come up otherwise. Now, obviously, when we're asking this question, when management asks this question, they're hoping for somebody to tell them what they might find if they go digging. Right? So if people are telling you things, it's less important to go digging. But if you ask this question at the end of a meeting and everybody says, no, everything's fine, then go digging. And if you find something, this is the time to really drive home the importance of being open and being honest with your people. And the reason for this isn't just that being open and honest is great, because it is. It's that often people don't realize how easily their problems could be solved by other people in the organization. Right? What might be a department stopper for you could easily be fixed with a phone call from your CEO. And often they're in a better position to make the decision of whether or not they want to put in that effort, or let you spend the next 2 weeks worrying about it.
You just brought up something really interesting, which brings me back to a client that I worked with a few years ago, where there was a specific situation exactly like this, where a very valuable, profitable customer was at risk, and the VP of sales knew it, but hadn't necessarily said anything. And when that person did say something, it was actually solved by a call from the CEO of the company. The answer was so quick. Oh, let me just call up so-and-so, right? And he got in touch. They talked about what was going on, and the business was secure. The business was fine. Had he let that go, had he not said anything, had he tried to perhaps solve the problem by himself, there's a very good chance they could have lost that business, and it could have been too late by the time the CEO made that call. Now, that's not to say, every situation is going to be solved by somebody jumping in, but I love what you're saying there is that, typically in management meetings of this type, board meetings, whatever you might have, you've got a certain amount of brain power around the table. And so it makes a lot of sense to use it. There's no harm in asking for help. There's no harm in asking questions, and there's certainly there's no harm in getting things on the table. So I think it's such a valuable concept that we don't see being used enough.
I agree. And I think just to try to bring this back to the immediately practical and applicable thing, what every company can start doing immediately when you start bringing these tactics into play, when you're moving toward radical candor, when you're asking things like, tell me what you don't want me to know, is highlight the cases where that happened. Highlight the cases where somebody told you something hard. And if you're able to solve it, if somebody else in the company is able to solve it, even better, right? What you want is to publicly praise those people who are taking the hard road, potentially embarrassing, potentially, putting themselves in a negative light, to share what problems or roadblocks they're facing. And when it comes out, when it's solved by having others in the organization help, or even just having others know about it, publicize that, make that well known. And on the other side, when you have to go digging to find something that somebody should have told you, when you've given people the opportunity to share with you problems or issues, and they still come up anyway and blindside you, make sure that that's publicized negatively.
So again, I love the topic. I think there's a few things that I want to do to bring this home here. One is obviously to dole out our challenge for today. And I think the challenge is pretty obvious in my eyes. And Shawn, you may have a different opinion, but the challenge is to ask the question. So at your next meeting, your next gathering of the minds, your next gathering of your executive or management team, ask this question, and don't tell them it's coming in advance, but ask the question. All right, what's the one thing you don't want to tell me? Or what's the one thing you haven't told me today for any specific reason? Ask the question, get the discussion going, and then try to continue to express to people that it's important to have this type of sharing to bring forward the true, open, honest communication. And again, not for the extent of repercussions or anything that's going to come from that, but that there's a lot of smart people around the table here. So let's help each other. Let's bring that forward. Let's give each other some advice. So Shawn, that's my challenge. What do you got?
I'm just going to reiterate that. I think that's a great challenge. And I want to just be very clear to everybody. When you're doing this, it's so important that your first reaction after something comes back can't be immediately to punish somebody because something went wrong in their department. You have to fight that instinct, praise them for sharing it rather than punishing because it happened, because it's already happened, right? What you need is more people sharing these things so that everybody can come in and help out. Save the punishment for those who aren't sharing out of a sense of embarrassment or fear or anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I can just picture it now, the question being asked and the first response coming in and then just somebody going ballistic. Definitely not the way to handle that the first time you ask the question. So, if you get some radical candor and some true, honest feedback or responses, use it as an opportunity to learn, use it as an opportunity to extend, the way you're going to be moving forward and start to shift the culture, perhaps, if you don't have a culture where that's typically the way things have always been. So, Shawn, anything else you want to add here in episode 41?
that covers it for me for this episode. It was a great discussion. I look forward to our next one, and we're going to be up to the 1 year mark soon. Exciting times.
Well, it's exciting times here at the Evergreen Show. We hope you take these tasks. We hope you take these challenges. We hope you apply them. You've got the challenge for today. As always, share the podcast with anybody that you think would get benefit and value from it, whether it's your boss, your coworkers, your colleagues, your peers, anybody in the organization. We appreciate it. Again, the podcast can be found pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found, Spotify, iTunes, everywhere else. And of course, reviews are always fabulous. And finally, if you ever want to get in touch with Shawn, I know I always say this, but you can reach out off my website. I always respond, or we always respond. And if you have a question, a concern, and of course, all complaints are always directed Shawn's way. Other than that, Shawn, we will talk next week, my friend.
That sounds great. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us each and every week for another great episode of The Evergreen Show with your hosts, Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on The Evergreen Show.